So I think this IC, I have done it before also a few times, and I think this is something which I am really very fond of, because this VR surgery nightmares, I think sometime or the other a young surgeon or even an experienced surgeon has encountered this problem during a normal surgery becoming complicated, and these very simple surgeries sometimes things go wrong. So I think if we pick up these mistakes early, we pick up these signs and we manage them early, probably we'll salvage majority of the eyes. And I have a host of great speakers with me. I have got Dr. Lalit here. I think all of us have learned something or the other from him at some point of our life. Dr. Ajay is also there, and I think my colleague, my junior colleague Vishal is there, and now even from RP Center who was passed out a couple of years back, Dr. Anil would be speaking in place of Professor Azad. Professor Azad is not available. I think if he would have been here, it would have been, I think the complete team would have been there, but I think Dr. Anil will do a fabulous job. So I think we can start with the first presentation. Dr. Ajay Arora, I think I don't, he's a well-known national figure. So Dr. Ajay, please will discuss your topic on submacular hemorrhage during a nominal vitrectomy, and please guide us and enlighten us.
So can you see my screen and I'm audible?
Yeah, so you're audible and your screen is also well visible.
Yeah, so at the outset, I must thank Bhuvan for giving me this opportunity. And I must say that while I was looking at, I started preparing late for this talk. Uh, but when I looked at the, I started doing search on the PubMed, will you be, I was totally surprised that there is not a single reported article on subretinal bleed during vitrectomy. During vitrectomy, there's not one article which is there in literature. So it was sort of very surprising to me that this is something which we do encounter during a surgery, but we have not reported. And I have a lot of other material which I'll have to now sift through, and I think Bhuvan, maybe we should put all this together. So some of the videos which I have actually been borrowed because it was a little last minute, but I'll try to share all the principles which I've learned over the years. Now, subretinal bleed can happen because of inadvertent damage to the retina, which we know that it can happen because we are not careful, or it happens accidentally, it happens inadvertently, and it can happen with a cutter, it can happen with any instrument, including a forceps when we are trying to peel a vascular membrane. It can happen during a drainage retinotomy when we create a drainage retinotomy, or when we're trying to drain and we touch the choroid under. A subretinal bleed can also happen when we are doing laser at the end of the surgery, when the laser is excessive and there is a sudden pop, and you can have a bleed happening from the laser site. Definitely, during relaxing retinotomy, it can happen, and subretinal bleed is known to occur when you're going to drain SRF in a sterile bucket. Now, what are the ways in which we should handle this? Always pay attention to any unusual bleeding. Why? Because if you do not, the blood will clot immediately and form a membrane. So then you will have to remove this iatrogenically created membrane because of the blood. It will also compromise your view, and hence the subsequent steps of surgery will get compromised. And if you do not take care and there's a break, it can become subretinal. Now, once a hemorrhage has occurred, what should be the immediate next steps? You should put a mechanical pressure over the bleeder, and this can happen with any instrument. It could happen with the end of a cutter, because the cutters have a convex surface. You could press it with a cutter. You could press it with a Tanner scraper. You could press it with any instrument which is at hand, which you can cause a mechanical pressure with the bleeder. And this you can only do if your hands are very stable and can press over the bleeder. We should raise the bottle height or increase the infusion pressure, which can be either by increasing the infusion or by starting on air and increasing the pressure immediately. Then you can inject PFCL to prevent blood migrating into the subretinal space. And PFCL, because of its weight, it will prevent small oozes and prevent the blood from getting accumulated over the macular area. You may need to switch to air if the water height cannot be increased, or if your machine doesn't allow an increased pressure. But certainly with air you can do it. And then you can add thrombin. This was reported long time back, but it has not become popular. This is an article which came out with the use of intravitreal thrombin control during vitrectomy, and they found that there was a substantial improvement. Um, um, there was a reduction of bleeding time from 111 seconds to 12.3 seconds after use of intravitreal thrombin. But the only problem with thrombin is that it induces inflammation, and you have to use you have to use steroids post-operative. Now, once you have done all this, you can use a careful thermocautery for a minimal ooze. You can actually use endo laser because it increases the it increases the temperature and hence causes a coagulation of the vessels of the bleeder. The PFCL can be maintained over the area where bleeding has occurred. You can continue with surgery. Removal of membrane should be done very carefully. If there is an overlying vessel over the membrane, it is better to leave the membrane, leave the clot. You can address it later on, or even it can be left later on. You don't even have to remove it. And this is especially true when it is present centrally or near the disc or near the macular area. Now, if the blood is becoming subretinal or and it may migrate to the macula, it is better to inject PFCL over the macular area so you prevent the blood from reaching the macula. If there is a break which you can identify, you should aspirate the blood with an active infusion with a new soft tape. I have found that if I do not know what the panel feels, but if I use an older soft tip, sometimes the blood doesn't come, and I preferably use a new soft tip or a hard tip where the soft tip has got damaged, and that can be used because otherwise a thicker clot may not come. In case there is no break, you can create a retinotomy after doing the cautery, and from there blood can be aspirated. Uh, I have used this extendable soft tip. This was very common with 20 gauge. We used to call it snake, which is available from Synergetics. And this can be extended through a retinotomy into the subretinal space, and one can catch hold of the clot, aspirate it, and remove it. If the blood is clotted and it is difficult to remove with aspiration, you can actually pick it up with an end gripping faucet, or even with a cutter with suction, and you can actually remove it. In case there is a massive subretinal bleeding, it's better to stop surgery. It's better to increase the intraocular pressure, close all ports, and increase the infusion pressure and wait for some time. I normally wait. I normally count for about 150 to 200, considering the bleeding time, and then I go inside, because if you keep meddling inside when the bleeding is actively going on, you can actually cause more bleeding and actually waste more time. In case this is also not possible, you need to close and intervene another day. I have done it on 2 occasions where the bleeding was very extensive. It was difficult to control it. So we had done most of the vitrectomy, and we put in silicone oil so that the blood could get compartmentalized. Went in another day. It was difficult to remove the blood because it forms multiple layers and it's difficult to remove, but it's possible. The rare situation is a massive suprachoroidal hemorrhage or an expulsive hemorrhage. Then you may have to abandon the case and operate again. So this is some example of a suprachoroidal hemorrhage where you have to suture the wound. This can happen after cataract surgery, but can happen after vitreous surgery also. And I've had the experience of having a suprachoroidal hemorrhage on the table while operating a retinal detachment. So acute drainage is not recommended in suprachoroidal hemorrhage. We generally observe them with serial ultrasonography, and we generally drain them from 7 to 14 days. A limited suprachoroidal hemorrhage can be observed. We have a fairly large series of managing suprachoroidal hemorrhage where an infusion cannula is placed uh, and a drainage is done, and a red glow will be visible once the suprachoroidal drainage is complete. This is some more examples of drainage being done, and you can see the suprachoroidal hemorrhage mount being visible during vitrectomy. These are some of the examples of patients who were treated post-op retina. You can see the buccal effect, and the patient did well. This is some more example where suprachoroidal hemorrhage, which is limited one, patient was observed. We did not intervene, and patient had good visual acuity. Now this is some of the borrowed videos. You can see here. This is a peripheral subretinal bleed where PFCL is being injected onto the center. There is a peripheral subretinal hemorrhage where one goes inside to retinotomy. The blood, the clot is cut, and I must acknowledge Manish for the video. And this is removed with a soft tip. Once it is removed, the PFCL is still maintained, and endocautery is done, and after that, PFCL silicone oil exchange is done. This is another patient who had with the same PFCL. Okay. So this patient had a subretinal bleed, which is located very close to the macula. Now here again a drainage retinotomy is done, and the PFCL has already been put in the macular area, so the blood doesn't migrate, and carefully the blood is aspirated, and once this gets removed, the surgery can continue. The blood has been removed. Then this is followed by a fluid air exchange, followed by silicone oil injection, and the retinotomy is lasered, and one can manage. But the most important thing in these cases is not to panic. This is a large subretinal hemorrhage. This courtesy Subhendu, where there's a large, there's a GRT with a subretinal hemorrhage. Vitrectomy is done, and during vitrectomy, we find the tripod is used to do most of the vitrectomy, and a blood one can go easily. Since there's a large break, one can easily grow subretinally, aspirate most of the blood, and once this is, yeah, I'll finish. This is the last. Probably push it further. The fluid air exchange is done, and conventionally endo laser with silicone oil injection and surgery is done. So what are the take-home points? Address any bleeding during vitrectomy immediately. Liberal use of PFCL, infusion pressure elevation. Do not panic, because you have to just sit back and think what next you have to do. In severe cases, one can go back another day and into. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
So, thank you, Dr. Ajay, for your presentation. Very nicely summarized. I think this is one of the complications all of us have encountered one time or the other. We have summarized, I think, the prevention a lot. I think we can have the discussion right now, sir, and then.
Yeah, that would be nice, because I have to go to another. I'll come back here again because there's another session. I have to be there, and I'll come back.
I just wanted to ask you one thing, that these are the most of. Sir, Dr. Lalit, you are not audible.
No, what I was saying is, let me present, and then after that Ajay can go. Ajay, you can wait for 5 minutes, sir.
Yes. I want to hear you
talk. I thought, Bhuvan, if you permit, let me finish talk, because there is a related similar video I have to show, so that we can have.
I just have one question for Dr. Ajay. Sir, I just wanted to ask. So you have shown the prevention and everything beautifully. You have shown everything, but sir, what to do if the blood goes submacular? What would be your
So
approach?
that's what. So I have done that. Actually, I was not able to take out the video, but
No, you can just take
but I can tell you what I have done. So
like a young
if the
surgeon is operating
yeah,
a fresh
if
RD.
there is a blood which is gone submacular, so there can be two situations: one where the macula is attached, and one where the macula is detached. So if the macula is attached, if the macula is detached, then it is easy. What I will do is the blood immediately is loose. So what I do immediately is put in PFCA. PFCL mechanically displaces the blood away from the arcade. Once it goes beyond the arcade, I'll create a retinotomy and remove it. In case the blood is gone submacularly, it's a very thin film, and I don't think that it is going to be of a major concern. I leave it like that. If it is a much thicker film, I'm not able to remove it. Then I have done. So I wanted to get that video. I've done in a situation where I created a retinotomy very far away. I created two retinotomies. One was temporal and one was inferior. There was a large subretinal bleed. We had to remove it, and we irrigated from one retinotomy and drained from the other retinotomy without causing any damage to the subretinal area. So there were two retinotomies. So like this is the arcade. I created a retinotomy temporally. I created one inferiorly.
So
So
you are operating bimanually.
bimanual. So I have a chandelier. I wish I had that video, but I irrigated from one and removed from another, and it worked out beautifully well. Then I have some videos where I've used TPA, but these were pre-operative subretinal bleeds, so you can't say that. In case it is an attached retina, obviously it will not go subretinally. It will not go to the submaxillary. It will remain away from the fovea. So this is my small, 2 cents take of how I handle it. But sometimes you do new things on the table, which I may not even remember now what I do, but yes, this is what I'll do. And I always take example or use infusion of air, because sometimes you're not able to exert too much pressure with fluid, but with the air I can tamponade it much better, and it really works out extremely well.
Yes, sir. So I think the important thing is here is we have to avoid submacular bleed. We have to displace the blood from the macula. There may be some blood which may be present away from the macula, but submacular bleed is something which should not be allowed. And as sir, you have described all the methods, we can have to displace it from the macula, drain it, do two retinotomies. I've also shown some videos on that earlier. One thing more which has been described, I think Dr. Lalit knows, you have to create sometimes a large temporal GRT, and
Yeah.
you have to turn the retina and you have to remove that large clot, and it has to be done, I think, on the same day, because submacular hemorrhage is toxic to the underlying retina, so we don't want any submacular hemorrhage.
So I've done recently for a patient who had a huge bleed after the choroidal neovascular membrane. We injected TP and he is fortunately done well. But this was, since your topic was so selective of intraoperative bleeding, I didn't wish to include those.
So thank you, Dr. Ajay, very much. And I think Dr. Lalit, please, you can start with the presentation. Dr. Lalit.
If you hang around for some time, we will discuss.
I will hang it on, sir. I'll hang it on.
So thanks, Bhuvan, for this nightmares, because I like this word nightmares. And as Ajay was saying, you see, don't panic, but panic and palpitations are part and parcel of any VR surgeon. Because I don't complete any surgery, it's the palpitations start happening. So I just share this small video, which you see, this was a young patient, so I had to put a buckle in this. This was a patient of detachment, myopic. You can see the thin sclera there. So in such patients, phakic patient, young patient, I definitely put a band there, and then we started doing this vitrectomy. So I had just started doing the core vitrectomy, and on the temporal side, I noticed this hemorrhage. I just started the vitrectomy. You see the base vitreous is still there. You can see this horseshoe tear here. So I still persisted, went around, did the base dissection. PFCL, as Ajay was saying, I did inject. So after doing adequate vitrectomy, I just diathermized that break. There was, C1 kind of PVR. So I tried to dissect this membrane from this. And fortunately, this membrane was not a very big membrane. The small membrane, it came out. So now the key question came what to do, because this blood was extramacular and the PFCL I had injected. So what I did was I had to do a drainage retinotomy because horseshoe tear was pretty anterior in a phakic eye. So I made, you see, one retinotomy and then started doing airflow exchange. And retina got settled because retina was not a, it was a not much PVR. So retina settled. So the key question came whether to remove the blood or not, because macula was nicely attached here. You can see the macula very nicely attached. So as I did one small, iatrogenic keratinotomy here and pulled this blood, but it did not come in a single go. You see, I am improving the suction, increasing. So small clot came. So I was not very happy because I am not very keen to leave this subretinal blood behind. So I made another retinotomy closer to the drainage retinotomy. And again, because first one blood had come, so I thought, let me try. If I can contact the backlash with the blood, it may come. So fortunately for me, this time, after engaging the clot, you have to be very sure that you are engaging the clot and move it tangentially initially, and this entire blood clot came out. So this happened during the surgery, and then we injected oil and came out of it. So VR surgery, I'll begin my talk now. To me, all VR surgeries are challenging, and they are struggle at very close quarters. And all VR surgeries are very different. None of them are same. And nowadays, patient demand are so much that they want to join back duty very fast. And consumer court is always hanging on our heads. And at times we are confused in a dilemma, like in this patient, whether to proceed or leave or what to do. And there's a constant struggle going on in mind. And therefore, panic and palpitating, both the P's are part of all VR surgeons who do this. And every VR surgeon is a fight, and fight is for success. And believe me, no one understands the pain and the stress of VR surgeon except a fellow VR surgeon. Nobody understands. So the topic given by Bhuvan was cannula not in position. You see, in all PPVs, infusion cannula is first in and last out. That's the principle Steve Charles, taught us long decades back. And before we proceed with vitrectomy, we always check and confirm the intravitreal location of the cannula. But there are situations where you may be caught, like a bullous RD in a phakic eye touching the lens. In eyes where corneal thickness is expected to be more, RD plus CD, uveitis, hypotony, endophthalmitis, small pupil. So here you should be wary of the fact that cannula can become subretinal, and you should be prepared for two things. One is AC maintainer, the other is a direct 6mm cannula. So I'll show you one or two videos only. This was a patient where, this was a resolved endophthalmitis actually. So we had to do a secondary vitrectomy. I did push in this cannula, but tip was not clearly seen. There was some muck around the tip of the cannula. So I made another retinotomy. Actually, I should have gone from the opposite side, but I thought I should be able to do it. So we depressed that port and cleared away this muck, because I had not turned on the cannula. You could see some hypotony happening at this time. So you depress it here, clear all the muck from around the tip. And till the time you see the tip, now it was clearly visible, then you turn on the infusion and do it. So seeing the tip is very important. So this was another patient. This was a active endophthalmitis. So here, because of hypotony, we did a needle infusion. This was preventive aspect, that we don't want to land up subretinal. And once needle infusion was done to firm up the glow, then we had this 6mm cannula. 6mm cannula are not easily available nowadays. So we had this 6mm cannula go direct in all these eyes which have thick corona. So last video which I want to show is again a patient who had a 49-year-old uveitis patient, posterior synechiae, ugly cataract with reg-looking RD. And this RD, this is a pre-op pictures. So we started this surgery. Since pupil was small and all, we did put a band there. You would see synechiae here and a lot of pigment on the anterior surface with some degree of cataract. Check the infusion cannula. And infusion cannula, if you see, we checked this, and to me, I saw the tip clearly. And we went inside, started operating, but notice the upper nasal, that is the light cannula, is subretinal. And so I thought this RD is becoming balloonous. So, and the left port is subretinal with the illumination. So we did a very half-hearted kind of vitrectomy. I could see a couple of breaks in the inferior part, and with a limited vitrectomy, still I injected PFCL because we had to somehow complete the surgery also. So till such time, and then I thought, let me shift now immediately. You see, once the cannula is subretinal, if you take out the cannula and keep shifting instrumentation, that also is not very good. So we shifted this cannula, upper nasal cannula. Now the instrumentation became cluttered because the ports are very close. So we still had the patience to do this. There were some breaks in the upper part also noted. Tried to do this vitrectomy, and there were PVR membranes all over, which we tried to separate and continued vitrectomy. And this break was iatrogenically done, which you see in the nasal part. And from that, some fluid I drained, fluid exchange, and after that, once the retina becomes sufficiently mobile, so I thought, let me take out the PFCL and we'll do. So at this juncture, what happened was, before I could turn on the air, the infusion port became subretinal during the surgery. So I checked, I could not see the port. This became subretinal now. So I again shifted, stopped that infusion, direct entry. Very important is straight entry now, no two-step incision. So again, check the port. So I could see. First step was to take out the subretinal layer which had gone initially. So took out that subretinal layer, which was not much at this stage. Then started this air fluid exchange. Unfortunately, this time we succeeded. And the 4 breaks which were previously there and one iatrogenic which I had created. So we had a nice flat retina, lasered all the breaks, put in the silicone oil. And since it was a re-surgery, the 2 surgeries were already done somewhere else, so we had to laser and create a false aura also, laser all around the. You don't want to subject him to re-surgeries. So this was the immediate post-operative period, retina settled. So what was the take home after this couple of surgeries? Is that maintain your calm, which Ajay also said, I agree. Avoid frequent exchange. If you are in doubt, do not have frequent exchange of instrumentations. Although retinal prolapse has become much rare with the 23-25 gauge, and avoid sudden jerky movements of the instrumentation because this can create dialysis or GRT. And consider needle infusion, as I had shown in one video, or even in phakic eyes, sometimes you can do an AC cannula also. And don't hesitate to change the ports, even if they become 4 or 5. And port entry this time should be vertical, straight, instead of angulated. And this is especially required whenever choroid is thick and boggy in eyes listed here, RD plus CD, uveitis, Endorf, and small pupil. And always have 6 mm cannula. Thank you very much for listening.
Very nice talk, sir.
Very nice talk. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think this is one problem which sometime or the other every VR surgeon has encountered, and picking it up early is very important. So just I think the most important thing is the vertical entry in certain cases which you highlighted, and to pick up the signs of the RD becoming suddenly bullous or a choroidal mount coming. I think you should just change your ports. Sir, another one thing I just wanted to ask: do you always make a new port? Or sir, would you also like to just remove the infusion cannula and so that we can just to hurry up in the superior to supranasal ports insert it?
That also is possible. You see, I agree that also is possible sometimes, but depending on the scenario and the ease of making it. In this patient, I did make. You see, total of 5 ports ultimately got made, and this is not visually looking good, but I agree with you.
No, I think whatever you have to do it as fast as you can, whether you can put it in that port or put in the port.
Yeah, Bhuvan, you rightly said you have to recognize those red flag signs here.
Yeah, that is very
important. Becoming balloonous, you see, and air going subretinal. So you have to recognize and act immediately. If you delay, then sometimes you may not be able to come out of the scenario.
And that can also lead to a subretinal bleed, and then we'll have to come to Dr. Ajay and discuss the other
management. So you have just one or 2 points can I add here?
Yeah, please, sir, please.
Just my observation.
I don't know, Vishal has just joined or he heard?
Yes, sir, I was listening to your talk, sir. I just wanted to make a point after Dr. Ajay.
Yeah, so just 1 or 2 points. One is that, we are all doing MIVS, and what is most important is once the cannula comes out, you must tape it. If you tape, otherwise you must tape the cannula, the
Yeah.
beginning of the cannula, because I have experienced, I do not know about others, but I've experienced that sometimes with the assistant moving the instruments here and there, they can pull on the cannula and actually it can become subretinal, become subretinal without even you knowing it. And so that is very important. Second thing is that I've had one experience that once the case was completely over, we were injecting silicone oil, and my assistant moved the cannula, and the last bit of oil actually became, supraparietal.
Oh,
So that was like the retina is settled. It's like a supraparietal oil, and it took a long time for following up the patient. Eventually, when we removed the oil removal, this oil came out. It's very good. Third thing I wanted to mention was that in case and doubt, I use a sutured cannula. I have sutured cannulas lying with me, 6 millimeter cannula, because those cannulas are very sturdy. And another thing which I've just tried is a small trick that instead of using the cannula through the normal cannula, you can actually remove the cannula and go directly so that you get some extra length. It is a little unstable, but you are able to manage.
Yeah, no, I think, sir, in that immediate situation, what you can do, you can put that cannula. I also do
Yeah.
it. Once
Yeah.
you get that the globe formation nicely, and the pressure builds up, you can probably put another port, as Dr. Lalit put, or you can use.
And another thing which I found is that what Dr. Lalit found, that once you remove that PFCL, like he had in this case, where it became a subretinal, I would try to keep the PFCL, do the fluid exchange, start putting oil, and then at the end do a PFCL silicone exchange for the small little bubble at the end.
I think, sir, many of these things are retrospective.
I agree.
We learn that we see from it. But when you're actually operating, then probably I think.
No. See, we are all discussing
so Bhuvan, therefore I said palpitation and panic are part of beard surgery.
That's how, I think many of the things are you learn from one case and you don't repeat it another, or retrospectively you think.
It is this palpitation and
so that's what we all learn, sir, I think.
And palpitation and panic is keeping us young, sir.
or making us old early, sir.
Vishal had to say something. Sorry.
No, sir, you covered the last point. I was about to mention that sir removed the PFCL, and in that process the retina got bullous, and that might have prompted the ear to go subretinally. You covered already. I was mentioning that only.
I agree. You see, every case where we have some issues we discuss, and if I had increased the PFCL and done a PFCL oil exchange, that would have been better.
Yeah. Dr. Bhuvan, may I ask one question to all of you? Do you people modify your sclerotomy sites in cases with small eyes, particularly the iridofuntal colobomas with RD? The location of ora serrata tend to be very variable in these cases. So, your opinion, sir?
Dr. Lalit, would you like to comment first?
So, a lot of these coloma eyes, depending on the age group and all, I may sacrifice the lens in a lot of these patients, because you see none of the coloma eyes, unless it's a extra colomatous break, we do a non-vitrectomy surgery. We do a vitreous surgery, and most of them get oil inside the eye because the colomas are inferior, and this gas may not work so well. So we put them oil, and they will develop cataract. So what I normally will do is that, you see, most of them, not always, but remove this lens so as to do adequate vitrectomy also, and we are not afraid to have a lens touch. So then the port alteration does not matter.
I think Dr. Lalit has very rightly said the age and the size of the eyeball is very important. Because colobomas, some of the colobomas may even have myopia. You can have a coloboma, but the size of the eyeball is very important. If the eyeball is very small, I think compromising the lens, you should compromise the lens for having a flat retina. But if the size of the eyeball is normal, you can just proceed normally, I think. You can go at a normal lens. So it mainly depends on the size of the eyeball.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
One, I'll just come back and finish out the presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I think, sir, I can. Third talk is mine, so I'll just start with my talk.
Because there is another topic which related to first one. In diabetics, you may have, because diabetics are more prone for bleeding because of vascular disease, and even if you give anti-VEGF before, there could be issues because diabetic membranes are different than others. They tend to be sticky. Hyalod peeling is difficult. There are multiple fibrovascular attachments. In case you pull too much, they tend either to tear the retina or to tear the vessel, and you can have uncontrolled bleeding. So let's hear Bhuvan, how does he manage bleeding during diabetic retinopathy?
Let me stay back and listen to.
Thank you, Dr. Lalit. So I think diabetic vitrectomies and endophthalmitis are one of the most difficult surgeries for a vitreoretinal surgeon. I think everybody wants to be very careful because there may be chances of massive hemorrhage, and everybody wants to just avoid this massive bleed because it will prevent the visualization and the surgery. So it is like a war, and we have to prevent bleeding and formation of retinal breaks. So I always think the best thing is to control the hemorrhage and to just stop whatever you're doing. So because otherwise you will not be able to proceed with the surgery. So with these advanced machines, with the smaller gauge vitrectomies, the surgeries have become really, very quite comfortable right now. The complication rates have reduced and quite complicated cases can be done. The viewing system has become better, illumination has become better. So the results of surgeries have improved, but still I think in diabetic patients, managing a diabetic VR is still a very big challenge. So just coming to my first video, I'll be showing a couple of videos. So with most of the dissection now, I think can be done with 25 gauge vitrectomies, even 27G I've done a few, but I think the tip is too flexible. I'm very comfortable with the 25G vitrectomy system. So you can do all of the dissection with the help of a cutter. You can go directly over it. And we have got such fabulous machines now. So what you can do, you can either cauterize these small bleeders, or you can use a laser probe only. You can do a endophotocoagulation and stop these bleeders. So in this case, there was not a very massive fresh bleed which was happening. So I used the endodiathermy to just cauterize these small bleeds. And for me, if there is no break, I will not use silicone oil in a diabetic patient. I'll just put air or gas if needed. So this was a relatively straightforward case. In this, you can just stop the bleeders with the help of endodiathermy. So what happens once the bleeding is not controlled? Your bimanual approach in diabetic patients is very good. You can aspirate with one, and you can do an endophotocoagulation or diathermize the bleeders with the other hand. Other important thing is when you cut the hyaloid, you should always do an outside in approach. That is what I prefer, and come at the optic nerve in the end. That will prevent the chances of severe hemorrhage. So what happens if the bleeding is still not stopping? We have got one foot switch. You can just press it and the pressure increases in the eye. You have to monitor the time. You have to be very careful because the disc in such patients and diabetic patients is compromised. Look at the arterial pulsations, then lower the IOP and recheck for the bleeder. So this is the next step. So if the bleeding is still not controlled despite you're not able to localize the bleeder or you have increased the pressure. So again, after doing a vitrectomy, you can see there is a large front which is seen in this patient. So most of the dissection again I do with the help of a cutter only. Can everybody please mute? So we can just do a direct dissection with the help of the cutter only. So most of the dissection is done with a 25 gauge cutter. If there are any bleeders which are visualized, you can diathermize them, and you can increase the pressure with the butter by pressing butter.
The admin mute everybody except Bhuvan because a lot of noise is coming.
Thank you, sir. So in this patient, I also did a foveal sparing ILM peeling. So I just increased the bottle height and the hemorrhage could be controlled, and then this is followed by a pan-retinal photocoagulation. So this is another. I would please request everybody so that they can put their. So this is another instrument. This is an aspirating endodiathermy probe, which was developed by Chang et al. and Andrew Chang. This is a very effective technique in which you can just aspirate using the diathermy probe, and then you can also do an endolaser along with it. So it can remove the blood clots, and along with that, you can do a PRP laser. And the second use is you can also cauterize, you can also do an endophotocoagulation of those bleeders. I have not used this, but I think it is a very effective thing. suppose there is still a persistent bleed which is happening and the media is becoming very hazy, the best thing is you better use valve cannulas or you plug all ports, wait for 2 to 5 minutes. You can also do a air fluid exchange, but if the bleeder is visible, you can also manually press it. So the important thing is you have to clear all hemorrhages, bleeding may stop. And I think I'm having a lot of disturbance.
Yeah, there's lot. I think I was checking the.
No, who is the?
There's some attendees there.
Sir, everyone is muted. I think the hall coordinator has to mute him also.
Yeah. Miss Doshi, are you there? Jinal Doshi.
So I think now it's quiet, so I'll start. So the next important thing is you can just use valve cannulas, plugged all the ports, wait for some time. You can count for about 2 minutes, 120 to 150. The bleeding may stop and then you can proceed. But if still the bleeding is not stopping, the best thing which I use in a lot of cases is PFCL. PFCL causes pressure tamponade. It closes the, tamponades the bleeder and then you can proceed further with the surgery. So this is another case in which there was massive bleeding during the removal of the removal of the membranes after membrane dissection. The bleeding was coming continuously. So then I put PFCL once to tamponade these bleeders, and then this was followed by the removal of the membrane. So PFCL, it causes a pressure, it stops the bleeding. You can go ahead with the laser during that time. It will also stop the bleeding, and then maybe when you later remove it, the bleeding stops. So now you can see under PFCL, I'm removing this. I'm trying to remove it. There may be a chance of creating this break, but this was a very adherent membrane. I didn't use a bimanual technique. Probably now retrospectively, I think it would have been better, but I could successfully remove it with PFCL. It acts as a third hand. So if a clot is formed, do not try to remove it. It will re-bleed again and again. So again, you put PFCL, try to laser under PFCL. There will be a good laser reaction under PFCL. So don't remove a clot if it is formed. So this is one case in which I did, again, I've cleared all the tractions and now there is a hemorrhage which is not stopping. So I inserted a PFCL bubble. I'm doing my PRP laser. Now in this, I removed the clot very proudly, but in the end of the surgery, when I did an air fluid exchange, there was again presence of a blood clot at the posterior pole, as you will see. So my important message is once a clot is formed, even if it is a large clot, I think it is better to leave the clot and not try to remove it again and again, because it will lead to a secondary hemorrhage, which can be much more worse. So these hemorrhages, they will take some time to clear. They'll take 2 to 3 weeks, but I think they'll do fine. The most important thing I think is do not create a retinal break. The surgical results will be much more better. So in the end, you can see I removed whole of the clot, but in the end of the surgery, when I did a air fluid exchange, there was again presence of the clot. But I've done my laser. I just injected gas in this case. So I'm pretty happy. I've done my laser, 360-degree laser. There is a gas. There was some hemorrhage at the posterior pole, and the patient had excellent results. This is another case. This patient had a tabletop severe old chronic TRD. So I have injected a PFCL bubble after doing a vitrectomy. So this thick membrane, which was thick tractional membrane, which was fibrovascular proliferation over the disc. So I have dissected it with the help of a cutter and scissors, and then pulled it with the help of Allen forceps. So I just, luckily for the patient and for me, I managed to remove whole of this membrane over the posterior pole. So again, there was no break created. So I have not put silicone oil in this patient. So once I remove whole of this membrane and the bleeding is controlled with the help of PFCL, I did a 360-degree retinal laser. The center part was elevated. You can see there is this elevation which is present. There's fluid there, so laser was not possible here. But as much laser peripheral till even till the posteriorly and peripheral was possible, I did it. I left this, and this will eventually settle if there is no break over some time. So the important thing here is not to create any break, to stop the bleeders for using PFCL. So this is my last video. This is one case which I always remember. I operated this patient 4 years back. This is a one-eyed patient, and he had the severe fibrovascular proliferation with a thick membrane over the retina. He had lost one eye, and in this eye, the vision was had movements. So I've done a peripheral dissection. I've done a PRP. Now I'm handling this aggressive-looking membrane. It is bleeding continuously. I cauterized some of the vessels, but it was not so helpful. So I injected a PFCL bubble. And this is a technique. Sometimes if I do, I'll just rotate the eye to stop the bleeding, and then I'll rotate the eye again and dissect with the help of a scissors. Normally I use a cutter, but here I was directly over the fovea. I wanted to be extremely careful, and if this patient could get any vision, I would have been really very happy, and by God's grace, things were going fine in this patient, for the patient as well for me. So very gently, all these tractions once removed over the macula, then I went ahead with a cutter and removed all these bridging dissections. I was not very aggressive. I wanted to clear whole of the fovea and relieve the tractions. I didn't want to remove all these membranes. I just trimmed these membranes in the end once all the traction was relieved. So PFCL really helped me to stop the bleeders and going. So after 1 week, this was the fundus picture. And after 1 month, the vision became much more clear. It improved to about 6/12. And this patient was seen in my OPD. He was reading a newspaper after 2 years, and it really gave a lot of satisfaction to me. So if the bleeder is still not localized and it is continuously bleeding, despite all these procedures, I think it is better to close it. Do not do a blind surgery. Reoperate the patient after 5 to 7 days. You can give an anti-VEGF at the end of the surgery, although I don't think it will work a lot. They usually wash out very fast. But the important thing, again, I'm stressing, do not create a break. It will lead to retinal detachment, more PVR. The other option which I've done in 1 or in 2 patients, I've done this. I've left the eye with PFCL. The patient I had to operate, not given preoperative anti-VEGF, and it was bleeding so much. So I left PFCL inside the eye, did as much laser as possible, and you can operate after 3 to 5 days. It is not very toxic. It may cause severe inflammation, but I have not seen it. You can operate after 5 days. And there are some publications by Australian authors who have done, they've left PFCL and it really works. They've even used it as a tamponading agent in GRT. So I think PFCL will tamponade the vessel, and then you can operate after 2 to 5 days, remove the PFCL, proceed with your surgery, and use gas, or if there is a break, you can use silicone oil. So the best thing is prevention. Control all the systemic status, control bleeding conditions, the diabetic status, hypertension. There are potential risk factor. Anticoagulant is associated with a higher risk, but there are no serious consequences. It is always better to suspend anticoagulant use, but there is no well-defined study. So it's very important for a good control of the hypertension. Prolonged surgery is usually unfavorable outcome. So again, I'm saying if there is a lot of bleed, it is better you stop the surgery, operate. So anti-VEGF have really been a game changer. I think most of in such complicated cases, it is better to use an anti-VEGF agent and then operate after 3 to 5 days. It has made the surgery much more safer, much more easier, improve the view, and decrease the chances of hemorrhage. So putting it all together, I think these all techniques, every surgeon has got his own approach. But for me, the first technique is better to use a valve cannula system. It will avoid the pressure fluctuations. You can easily increase the pressure. Chandelier light should always be available. I don't use it in every case, but I keep it. If I need it, I will use it. Cut the hyaloid from outside in. I think this is a better approach to avoid severe hemorrhage. If you go straight at the disc and you cause a severe hemorrhage, then you have not even completed your vitrectomy. You can use, you can aspirate with one hand if you're using a chandelier system, with the other hand. So tip number 5, again, use preoperative anti-VEGF agents in such cases, and it is better to operate within 3 days, maximum 5 days, so that the contraction does not increase. And as I said, do not pull these membranes. They can cause more hemorrhage. It can cause a break. If you cause a break, then things become really messy. So use of PFCLs, I think it is a very helpful thing. I use it quite frequently in diabetic patients. If I'm in a problem, it gives a clear media. You can perform a laser under it. You can remove certain membranes under it. And in worst case scenarios, I think it can also be used as a tamponadic agent, and later you can reoperate it. So I sometimes even don't even use gas. I would just like to leave air, and most of the patients do fine if I have not created a break. So thank you very much for listening, and so over to you, Dr. Lalit, please.
Truly wonderful talk. You see, diabetic eyes are one of the most difficult and challenging eyes to operate. You see, bleeding, segmentation, membranes, they're so difficult, and whatever approach you may, advocate from outside in or inside out, there's no single approach which can be done. Although I agree, because if you go at the disc and it starts bleeding, then even the peripheral job is left out. So, in fact, you said 7. I think you listed more than 10, 15 tips to avoid bleeding. But nonetheless, you see, we have to be wary of these 2 things only. And one thing which has really made a difference is pre-op anti-VEGF. Pre-op anti-VEGF have really made a difference. in the incidence of bleeding. And sometimes you see, if the bleeding has been too heavy, at the end of surgery also, in some percentage, I have injected post-op anti-VEGF also at the end, but not as a routine, not as a routine. Only thing, I do not depend too much on the laser for control, because laser may control small oozes, but actual bleeding which we are concerned, that is for this, you see, cautery is important, diathermy. Because you see, no diabetic, we should not start any VR surgery for diabetic without diathermy in place. Because if diathermy is not in place, you see, you can have anything else, but you can't start this surgery. So rest valve cannulas is very important. Control, BP control is more important than blood sugar control. Laser is very important. The other thing which you highlighted very, very nicely was don't disturb the clot, especially if it's on the disc. And if you remove and suppose there's a ooze again, second time, please don't dislodge the clot. And you can trim it all around, but don't pull it. If you pull, your life will become miserable in case you pull that clot, because it will create a heavy bleed. The other thing is I would add is bimanual, I think, should be stressed slightly more, because bimanual surgery in patients where, especially near the arcades, where, the dissection even with 25 gauge maybe or 27 may be slightly difficult, you may not find the exact plane. Bimanual surgery may add some precision, and the possibility of bleed may be less. This is my perception that, bleeding may be less with bimanual because of precision of using the scissors. And in case, you use any other thing, bleeding may be slightly more. I think wonderful job done, Bhuvan. And all
Can I add one more point to your?
Yes, Vishal.
Excellent talk, Bhuvan. I would just also say that when I I'm about to complete the surgery and I'm doing the PRP, I reduce the pressure to 20 from 35 or 30, because at that time that's the physiological pressure which the patient will have in the post-op period. And if there are any bleeders, they'll be visible while doing the PRP. So if you are doing your laser or you're doing a maneuvers at 30-35 mmHg, some bleeders might get occluded. But the true sense of bleeders will be visible only at 20 mmHg, and then you can cauterize them. Otherwise, you will find that at the end of the surgery it's all fine, but post-op there is some bleed left.
Wonderful, Vishal, because all diabetics, whatever you leave on the table, next post-op day, majority of the complicated diabetic VRs will have more bleed than what you left.
Yeah.
Majority. Not
I mentioned that you have to reduce, and I do my surgeries at 25. That is my routine surgeries.
I agree with Vishal this point. I also forgot.
You have to reduce your pressure.
I bring it down because it's air-filled eye or silicone-filled eye. I don't, then I in fact bring it down to 15 in compromised disc, because if the disc is already white, a lot of these patients have associated, optic nerve pallor because of vascular infection. So they can't tolerate high pressures for a long time. Other thing, Bhuvan, you highlighted was count, because if you keep 60 millimeter pressure for some time, you may do excellent job, but patient has, optic atrophy. So excellent job, Bhuvan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Let's move on, I think. Go on.
Yes, sir. I think so. Our next speaker, Professor Azad, is not available. So in place of him, Dr. Anil Gangve will be speaking, and he is also passed out from RP Center. He is also our colleague, and he'll be speaking on the slippage of giant retinal tears. And another very important thing, which a lot of young VR surgeons, even experienced surgeons, we have encountered this problem that when we do a fluid exchange or when we are operating a GRT, it tends to it leads to a slippage. So I think this is a very important thing. So over to you, Anil, please.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Professor Azad, AIOC, for this opportunity. So if we look at the history about evolution of management of giant retinal tear, then before invention of modern vitrectomy, GRT used to be, most of the cases used to be considered as inoperable, and however, even after use of modern vitrectomy, management of the posterior flap has been an issue until we have started using PFCL. So before PFCL, after completion of vitrectomy, the patient used to be kept in a supine position, and the vitreous fluid used to be replaced with an injection of air, and the posterior edge of the flap used to be flattened, and the subretinal fluid and fluid from vitreous cavity used to be drained from anterior segment, anterior chamber, and most of these patients were made phakic for this maneuver. However, with the invention of modern vitrectomy, now we have been used to we have started using the manual vitrectomy, and with the just excuse me for a second.
This audio is really bothering us.
Yes, sir. There is some disturbance in my background. I'll just rectify it.
Bhuvan, where is Dr. Anil working?
Yes, sir. Just 1 second. I think.
Okay.
So, with you, is the screen visible, sir?
Yes, we can see.
Yes. So, with this use of perfluorocarbon liquid, now handling the giant retinal tear has become much more easier. So, as I was highlighting, after completion of vitrectomy, we will start putting the PFCL, and before injecting the PFCL completely, managing the PVR or the rolled edges of retina is equally important, so that inadvertent chances of fluid going into subretinal space, they are not there. So that has been, and once it has been achieved, then the posterior edge is flattened, the subretinal fluid is being taken care of, and once the retina is flattened, then a number of 3 to 4 rows of confluent laser are applied at the posterior edge. Most of the instances, the time when we encounter subretinal or posterior slippage is when we start air PFCL exchange, and at that time most of the issues tend to rise. So management of anterior flap, lot has been talked, but most of us now do advocate that the anterior flap has to be removed by retinectomy so as to prevent postoperative neovascularization. And so the tamponading agent, most preferred tamponading agent is usually silicone oil in most of the cases. However, if the tear is posterior enough and is well supported, then in even gas can be used as a tamponading agent. So again, coming to that
Anil, we can't see your screen.
Yes, sir.
Share your screen, Anil.
So coming to the topic again, that once you have realized that there is slippage, then we will have to manage that. First thing is to, best thing about management will be identify that slippage. Babu, please. So the first thing will be to identify that slippage. If we can identify it at an early stage, then we can manage it with a limited time. And the first thing will be, option one will be to inject PFCL again, even if we are under air or under silicone oil. And if with limited PFCL injection, if we can actually dry out, because it is the fluid at the posterior edge of that flap that will be causing much of the problem. So if you can inject more PFCL without increasing the intraocular pressure, then we will dry out the posterior edge, and we can actually settle the take care of that slippage. Another thing will be, if the fluid has migrated into the subretinal space and it is causing slippage of that flap, then if fluid is visible and we have enough of space to create a drainage retinotomy, then we can also create one just posterior to the posterior edge of GRT, and then we can look and drain that subretinal fluid. And if the flat is if the edge of that tear is flattened, then we can resume the surgery. However, in cases there might be, we might have removed sufficient amount of PFCL or have injected more than half of the silicone oil. In that situation, we may have to actually switch on the fluid infusion again, take out the injected silicone oil, and again inject the PFCL and redo the entire procedure again. And to avoid that, best thing is to, in rare circumstances, there might be, particularly as sir was also talking, that some of the youngsters or during our training, we may find it difficult and there might be repeated slippage. In that situation, best thing will be to call the mentor, take someone's help. And in some of the cases, it has been also recommended that posterior retinectomy extending up to the equator can also be done, so that the chances of slippage due to gravity will possibly decrease. But these are two radical things, and whenever possible can be avoided. Second thing is the best thing in the management would be we should prevent, or we should be able to contemplate such things which are going to happen. So this posterior slippage of GRT is much more common in GRTs which are more than 180 degrees and GRTs which are commonly located anterior to the equator. So we should be ready to manage these kind of cases. So during surgery, we should be able to reposit the rolled edges of GRT, and if there is any PVR on the edges of tear, then we should take care of the PVR before injecting complete PFCL. And sometimes there may be interretinal contraction, or then in such cases the edges of the tear can be freshened up, and even radial relaxing retinectomies extending into posterior segment, posterior retina, can also be done. This will actually help to convert these 270 or 360 degree GRT into small segments, which can be actually then taken care very well. And next comes is the most important step, where most of our slippage occur is during our air or PFCL exchange. During this step, the remnant of fluid or aqueous which is there at the posterior edge shall be taken care very well, so as there is no fluid which is migrating posterior to the edge, and slippage can be prevented. So again, in the era of this modern MIVS, injecting silicone oil through this infusion cannula becomes an issue, and we commonly encounter that the cannulas may actually come off, and again there can be hypotony and chances of slippage. So while selecting this cannula, we should be careful, and the process of silicone oil PFCL exchange should be done very carefully and slowly, so that we do not encounter such hypotony or slippage of the cannula. So there are various techniques actually which has been described to avoid these issues. There is technique where people are using chandelier illuminator, and rather than connecting the silicone oil infusion to a main infusion port, they are directly injecting the PFCL using the cannula, while with soft tip, the PFCL is being removed passively. Another technique described by Ahmad et al. Has been that the silicone oil is basically connected to the infusion cannula, while the other port, one is using light, and with other port, the active extrusion or aspiration is activated. This can be done with most of the manual vitrectomy machines. So once the preset injection pressure for silicone oil is reached, the active aspiration is started and the PFCL will be extruded. But a combination or hybrid technology where chandelier can also be used, and an active aspiration along with silicone oil injection can also be used to minimize the chances of slippage. And a novel technique described by Devon et al. Has been there. They are also using bimanual technique, where they have shown that in this technique, the author described that instead of at the time of air silicone exchange or air PFCL exchange, instead of using passive extrusion, what they have done is they have used two soft tube cannulas. With one soft tube cannula, they are removing the PFCL, and with other soft tube cannula, the posterior edge is being actively kept dry. And
hello, sir. Hello. Sir, sorry, your slide is not visible.
Okay, sorry. So in that technique, what they have done is they have actively used a cannula to dry the posterior edge, while with a soft tip they are removing the PFCL remnant. In the other technique described by Madan Gopalan, what they have done is the fluid, which is actually the source of slippage or source of fluid migrating posterior to the edge, they have sandwiched this fluid between PFCL and injection of oil and removing it from the other port. So once this has been achieved, the process of laser, which is usually done under PFCL and under fluid, is usually done in this method under silicone oil and PFCL posteriorly. With this method, the chances of slippage in their particular case has been none of the cases that in their report has experienced intraoperative slippage. So these have been various techniques where people have modified their experiences and management of the posterior slippage. So again, one thing that Dr. Bhuvan was also talking about, that PFCL itself can also be used as a short-term tamponade, and in most of these such cases, the PFCL is removed after 1 week and it is replaced by either silicone oil or gas at the time. However, in these cases, a two-step procedure will be required, and the issues that he was talking, that toxicity or mechanical effect can also be there, and chances of inflammation and rise in intraocular pressure will always be there. So in short, what I will suggest is if there are slippage, best thing will be to manage with re-injection of PFCL, and if we can prevent the posterior slippage by very good intraoperative management, then that is the best thing. And in our most common scenario, we have been using PFCL silicone oil exchange. With that gradual thing, posterior slippage has been very much less common. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anil. I think you've summarized everything in a very nice way. You had Dr. Azad only informed, I think, day before yesterday, very less time to prepare your slide. You have done a good job and you have covered everything. So I just want to summarize few points that you said. I think the most important thing is you have to do a good vitrectomy along the edges of the GRT. Sometimes we needed to trim the margins of the GRT to prevent any attack, because these are the reasons which can cause a slippage. Remove all PVR, as you said, you have to remove all PVR membranes, and the stiffness of the membrane are very important, and dry the edges completely. So these things will prevent a slippage. Again, one important thing which you said was these radial retinotomies. I think these are very important things. I think if the GRT is slightly stiff or slightly old after doing everything, it is all better to make some radial retinotomies at the edges and in the center. Prevents the slippage which has happened. Then one more thing which you said was the direct PFCL silicone oil exchange. I think yes, in certain cases of GRT, rather than going for a PFCL air exchange and then putting silicone oil, you can go for a PFO silicone oil exchange directly. And using a chandelier system is very good, because the cannula with a 25 gauge system, usually it just will come out. So I think using a chandelier is something which I do. You can put a chandelier and then you can aspirate it and also inject silicone oil with the other hand. And I think PFCL as a tamponade, I'm not used in GRTs per se. I've used in few diabetics, but I think that is also something. If you are having probably recurrent slippage after all your maneuvers, if you still have it, I think the best thing is you can leave a PFCL, do a good laser, and then reoperate quite early. So if any other points, sir, Dr. Lalit, Vishal, Dr. Ajay, if you want to add, please, sir.
I think he has covered up very nicely. The best way which I have found is if you keep the fluid needle in the gap. That is one of the best ways. Keep it dry, because that fluid needle, if you lose the sight of that, then slippage may happen, whether it's light or small or big. Then all this process will restart. But then if you do it manually, that is slightly traumatic. You see, if you push with the help of diamond dust aid or soft tip, that I don't like, because you may have small hemorrhages there, or it may not get pushed. So best is don't lose that sight of of that gap. If you because this happens in a very interior. Suppose the GRT is very fresh and you unroll, because in GRT what is advocated is PFCL, fill it up till the iris. Some people say PFCL should start coming in the green cannula. Itna sara PFCL डाल दें. So
Complete.
yeah, complete fill. And then once you start doing direct exchange, you see, I normally rarely do PFCL air and then air oil. Majority or 100% of the GRTs will have direct exchange. That is the best kind of, There is one question for you, Anil, in the chat box. What about the role of any type of buckle in GRT case?
Sir, I personally do not recommend it because there are reports, and even in my practice, I have found that once I have stopped using prophylactic buckle during GRT, the chances of slippage has been reduced. So currently, I am not using in cases of GRTs.
Yeah, I also agree with you that role of buckle has decreased. You see, what we do is after taking care of membranes and unrolling of the flap and diathermy, I normally will, if the pushia flap is everted, I'll diathermy and trim it so that it becomes flat. Anterior part of the GRT is eaten away with the cutter. So role of buckle support has actually gone. Vishal?
Yeah.
Sir, actually, it will promote slippage if the buckle indent is more.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It will increase the risk of slippage.
Will increase the risk.
GRT.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just I want to add one more point, sir. Once we do a GRT and you're trimming the interior flaps, you're doing a good laser of 4 to 8 rows. So what do you do about those interior edges? Do you laser it till the equator, till the aura, or not?
No, if the visualization permits that, I will take the reaction, you see, of all the sides also, radial extensions also, and try to do laser at the interior. Sometimes under indirect or under microscope only, 1 or 2 spots of cryo, because we want that area to be this thing. But believe me,
it's very important. We have to, sir, that area also has to adhere to the retina. We can't leave it because the fluid will seep down and we can have a 360-degree retinal detachment anterior to the laser.
Not really. Generally, I was very aggressive in doing cryo before, but a lot of these people say cryo actually is not required. But Bhuvan, honestly speaking, I do subtle cryo, not white cryo.
Yeah.
White cryo will promote.
But sir, I just said till we can just complete till the anterior, till we can go anterior till the edges and just cover it. A subtle cryo, not a. Of course, cryo can lead to severe PVR and everything. To subtle cryo.
So let's hear.
You can indent it and just complete the laser. If somebody is we have a good assistant.
That is better actually. In case laser spots start coming anteriorly, that is the best kind of scenario. Then you don't need this cryo. So Vishal.
I think sir, Vishal will speak one of the most interesting topics. I think, as Dr. Ajay also said, your assistant may remove your cannula at some point of the surgery and you suddenly notice a globe collapse, or probably the cannula just comes out because of some of your maneuvers. Despite putting tape, sometimes my assistant will just remove my cannula. So I put 2 tapes and still when they're just removing my biome, they will remove the cannula along with it.
So best is to change the assistant rather than, you see, all of us keep saying that Fellow has done this.
Now I remove my biome on my own. I don't ask anybody. I don't need much. I have tried to stay away from assistants. I think that.
Why I don't like these words. Fellow ne kar diya ya assistant ne kar diya.
So I don't want. I try to be as independent as possible. I think now retinal surgeries have become more independent.
We have to assume responsibility.
Yeah.
So yes,
Vishal will be discussing all those things, the early signs and the sequelae about these.
So thank you, Bhuvan, for having me here, and those of us who were, present in Paris 2019, the fall of 2019, would never forget such a show that Bhuvan had put up. And I think Dr. Lalit sir was sitting in the front row, and it was a huge hall with 500 capacity, and it was full. People were sitting on the floor. People were sitting on the floor, and it was an absolute stampede. Actually, I've never seen such crowds in any retina hall.
Yeah, even in AIOS, I haven't seen so much of crowd. Bhuvan, I still remember that course which you did in.
So, sir, thanks to my speakers. I think.
And that amount of crowd I have already seen only in banquets where they invite superstars to sing and dance. So that's a mode of
Well, okay, carry on, Vishal.
So, sir, I'll be speaking on globe hypotony, cause, sequelae, and management. And though rare, complications related to retinal surgery can have serious consequences. Unfortunately, most are preventable if detected early. And the common complications we all encounter are globe perforation, light toxicity, drug toxicity, post-operative hypotony, iatrogenic tears, etc. These are rare because intraoperative hypotony is rare because of modern VR tools, the use of walled cannulas and advanced fluidics, but still can occur in the hands of the most experienced surgeons also. And early recognition and management prevents potentially devastating complications in these cases. So the basic logic behind the globe hypotony is one, that is there is a mismatch of infusion and aspiration, and that can be due to blocked or a leaking infusion cannula, kinked infusion cannula, a high suction and a low bottle height, active aspiration which is not matching your IOP pressure, non-walled cannulas, and disinsertion of the infusion as many videos were shown. And while working under air during vitrectomy, temporary globe collapse is there. More specifically, under open cannula conditions such as frequent instrument exchange with non-walled cannulas, globe hypotony can occur. And in the sequelae part, possibility of a myriad complications depending when this complication occurs. It can lead to bleeding, it can lead to iatrogenic tears because of a sudden globe collapse, it can lead to anterior lens touch and a cataract formation, corneal edema, hazy view, submacular hemorrhage, as Dr. Lalit mentioned, and choroidal detachment. The management, the first part of the management is to identify early signs of hypotony, and next is to identify the cause and to rectify it immediately. And the last is to manage complications that have already occurred in this process of rectifying it. So checking machine parameters, external support to the infusion line, like double taping or taping the infusion line, and vigilance to surrounding apart from the surgical field. And plug should be placed to secure fluid airflow through the cannulas, prevents hypotony due to excessive fluid flow through the sclerotomies. So I'll be sharing few videos and a few scenarios where globe hypotony can occur and what to do in case globe hypotony causes complications. So this is a video of a traumatic endophthalmitis case, and in which we have already put a 6 mm cannula, but the block is incomplete because of the inflammation, and the patient is squeezing so much that the cannula is kicked again and again, and even a 6 cannula, the lid is pushing towards the 6 mm cannula, and it's causing globe hypotony. And it's always good in these cases, just not to rush things and augment your block so that the patient is comfortable, the surgeon is comfortable, and the eye is open widely with the speculum, and there is no tangling of the wires of the instrumentation. So we just gave augmented a subtenous block in this case, and that's a very useful way without risking a globe perforation intraoperatively. Also, it gives a perfect block. And now you can see the speculum is wide open and there is no squeezing of the eye, and we could continue our surgery. During fluid air exchange, globe hypotony can occur. So this is a case of a routine macular hole, as you can see. And after the ILM peeling, when we went under air, we aspirated the fluid. And when when the cutter was in the air part and you are using active aspiration, at that time, the globe hypotony occurred. As you can see, there will be a contraction here. So your instrument should be in the fluid and not in the air when using the active suction. Of course, if you're using a passive suction, it does not matter much. Of course, 6 mm cannula is very helpful in cases where there is large amount of bleeding or the view is very hazy. But even after using 6 mm cannula, you have to make sure that the tip is inside the vitreous cavity and not cause globe hypotony in the intraoperative period. As you can see, even in this 6 mm cannula, the tip is covered by the tissue, and we have to use another instrument to dissect all the tissue around that cannula. So I'm using the trocar blade and to remove the tissue over the tip of the 6 mm cannula. Now the tip is seen and you can start the infusion safely. So we have all seen that during in diabetic vitrectomy, everything is fine, and while going under air and after all the procedures completed, there is some amount of bleeding, and you can check for these oozers and coagulate them, or you can just simply aspirate them. So during air, if there is a little hypotony, these bleeders come up, and it's actually good. So you can identify them and rectify all these bleeders so that post-operatively, in the first day, there are the retina is dry and not filled up with blood. So this was again a macular hole surgery in which the things were going very smoothly, and during the vitrectomy part, the cannula was disinserted, and we caught it early, and you can see the choroidal detachment temporarily, and then we reinserted the cannula again, and we continued with the ILM peeling, and the surgery then went off successfully. So it's very important to see not just the part where you are operating, like in macular hole, you are always concentrated on the macula and the ILM peeling, but also frequently give a glimpse to the periphery, and you can identify these problems early enough so that these cases can be rectified and you have a satisfactory post-operative outcome. This was a case of a IOL drop in attempted SICS, and some amounts of nuclear fragments were also there. And the mistake here, what I was doing was I thought that the wound was secure enough. I did not suture it for the IOL removal. I thought I will remove the IOL through that wound. And as you can see, while I'm removing the IOL, attempting to remove, there is some trickle bleed, which from the surgical field, it has gone through the SICS wound and into the posterior pole. So we had to remove that, sutured the SICS wound, and cleared the trickle bleed which had settled on the posterior pole, and removed the IOL after that. This is the PVD injection part, and now the vitreous cavity is clean. Myopic RDs are very prone to hypotony and their insults, and they frequently lead to choroidal bleeds. As in this case, you can see immediately after starting the surgery, there is a streak blood submacular, but the amount of the blood, after injecting PFCL did not increase, and so we continued the surgery and did not drain it. And at the end of the surgery, the amount of blood was the same, and post-operatively after a week or so, it disappeared. So a small amount of bleeds are common in myopic RDs, and they don't need to be removed. But in this case, because of the hypotony, there was a large bleed, and this is the lattice with the break, the original lattice, and we had to enlarge it, to drain all the blood, because all the choroidal bleed was coming through the retinotomy in the vitreous cavity and causing limited visibility. So we injected PFCL of the posterior pole, and that helped the blood iron out to the periphery, and then we drained all the blood to the peripheral large retinotomy. So the point here is, if you clear all the blood and all your breaks are well lasered, this bleed will spontaneously resolve on its own in a couple of weeks. And if you leave blood and hope that it will resolve by itself, sometimes that does not happen, especially in RD cases if there is silicone oil in situ. And these clots sometimes form and they retract and they form additional breaks, which can lead to re-RDs. And this was a case where there was a lot of PVR after blood had been left, and we had to go inside and remove all these degraded hemoglobin blood, and trim the edges of the breaks, make them fresh, and reinsert oil. So if a large amount of oil is there in the post-operative period, it's a good idea to go in early and not wait them to contract and create additional breaks, causing a re-RD. This was an interesting case of optic disc pit in a pediatric patient. The patient was 6-year-old, and there was residual suction of the cutter after stopping the cutting. So there was a residual suction even after lifting the foot switch off, and you can see that the optic disc, there is fluid egress from the pit when there is a hypotony in that case. So now you can see there is a residual suction, and I'm going near the pit, and when I stop the cutter, you can see the pulsating optic disc pit. Because of the hypotony, the fluid is coming out of the pit, and actually it helped me delineate the pit size and the pit location, and we finally decided to peel the ILM and plug the ILM inside that pit, and we had a good satisfactory outcome after that. So this is the pit in which there was a fluid coming out into the vitreous cavity, and in these cases it makes sense to plug the pit because that is the source of the fluid and the retinoschisis. So to conclude, infusion misdirection resulting in hypotony seems to be infrequent, but still remains a risk, and awareness of the problem reduces the incidence but does not eliminate it. To touch the retina, choroid, and the lens are the potential complications when hypotony occurs. and can be avoided with all the points we have already discussed, like correct positioning of the cannula, checking the machine parameters, and placing external anchorage like taping the 23 gauge infusion pipe. Of course, walled cannulas are a huge advantage over non-walled in maintaining the IOP, and early management and detecting the cause of the hypotony is the key to success, lest things go out of hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal. Thank you for your presentation. Excellent presentation. You have covered everything. I think this hypotony has to be picked up very early. Your last point was so important. It can lead to all the complications which we have discussed. It can lead to a bleeding. It can lead to submacular hemorrhage, choroidal detachments, and I think we have to manage it. The early step is to look at if there is the eyes becoming soft or there is presence of a CD which is happening. Find the cause. Look at the infusion cannula, whether the machine has stopped or not. There is kinking of the cannula and to address it. I think Vishal has covered everything very nicely. I don't have anything else to say. So any other for the panelists who want to say anything else?
And don't blame your nurse or the
nobody can be blamed for it, sir.
No, the reason
immediately.
But
I think what Vishal brought out there one point which I was not there for early part of this thing, but the blood trickling down in a case where the IOL is there trickling down from the surgical field. I also had it, and it sounds very stupid to yourself that why it happened. But yes, one has to take it every step so that it doesn't happen.
The problem, Vishal, is that we keep talking about valve cannulas, but the problem is we can't have fresh valve cannulas in every day, because you see, valve tend to give way with reusage. Yes. And let's be frank enough that all of us reuse these cannulas. So valves tend to give way, and even at the cost of tolerating some kind of what you said fluid mismatch between this aspiration and infusion, we still linger on. So I just hope that the cost comes down so that we are bold enough to use fresh everything in all the cases.
So I have a small suggestion here, sir. Can I speak, Bhuvan?
Yeah, sure.
So I have with Epsilon, we have actually made separately valves, not the cannulas, the valves itself, which can be bought separately. But the only problem is they are not so proactive in this. I have also made a special faucet so that these valve cannulas can be held in the faucet and put on that cannula. I have used with some of them, but again the problem is availability. Once it become available, I think most of the PCs are available.
Excellent point.
Sir, I just want to make a point, last point if Bhuvan permits me.
Yeah.
That while, what is the most common irritating thing I find is after SOR, when your oil has been removed and you're suturing the wound. So what happens is after oil removal, the globe is a little hypotenuse and there is some bleeding, conjunctival bleeding, and that trickles at the posterior pole through that port. I don't know, I think everybody has encountered that. So that is a problem. So what I do is I put a small amount of visco over the wound while suturing it. So it jellifies the liquid, the blood, and less chances are there that it goes into the pit cavity. So that is
we all do sometimes.
Yeah, I think we all do. And sometimes I think it is always better, like when you're removing a final infusion cannula, especially during a SOR. I think SOR, when you do, there are very high chances. So I tend to put a pre-placed suture, there, like we do with we used to do with a 20 gauge cannula.
6 mm cannula,
yeah, or even a 4 mm with 20. I put a pre-placed suture, and while removing it, I'll tie that suture.
We are lazy surgeons.
May I suggest a small thing in this, which I have started doing and virtually eliminated all this problem, is that normally we do 2-port or 3-port oil removals, depending on the emulsification. So upper 2 ports are closed. The lower port, the infusion port, is still on. So before, I always do a partial fluid exchange.
Yeah,
1 minute is remaining. So what I'll do is I'll take a 30 gauge needle and connect it to the infusion pump, air pump. So I can clamp the infusion cannula, take it out. So the tautness of the globe is being maintained by 30 gauge needle, which is from the superior port, from the superior past ventricle. Upper 2 ports are closed. So as you give intravitreal in a 2-step, I will insert 30 gauge needle. This is maintaining the preventing hypotony.
So,
and let the lower port be closed.
30 gauge with air or something.
30 gauge needle, yeah?
With 30 gauge attached to
Air pump.
उसमें एयर पाइप लगा दो. अच्छा.
Air pump नीचे disconnect कर दिया, and this is maintaining. And then you remove the infusion cannula from below, because this is maintaining. Because sometimes during removal of the infusion cannula, your suturing something may not be perfect, and you have to sometimes cut the conjunctiva off.
leakage or something.
And once that is closed, so last step is to take out this needle. And this, you see, next day I used to have pressure of say 7, 8, or 10, but this I think it is always about 10 or 12. And possibly what all of us have seen is.
Extreme apologies to interrupt because
You are full liberty. We are all closing the session.
no, sir, the valedictory has already started. That's the reason I interrupted.
Nobody.
Thank you. And Dr. Lalit is here, so it doesn't matter. The valedictory doesn't. Dr. Lalit is most important.
No. Thank you, Bhuvan, and you can conclude, Bhuvan.
Thanks, Bhuvan. Thanks a lot.
So
I will conclude by one line. Bhuvan, your nightmares were very important. Let's hope all the VR surgeons have less and less of nightmares after attending all these webinars. So we don't want too many nightmares.
Thank you, sir. I think nobody wants to have these nightmares, but I think these things are unavoidable if you are operating. Sometime you will face.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.